Hyperbaric oxygen therapy. What's happening here is that we have a person's lungs, and we still have to breathe in the oxygen. So oxygen comes in through your trachea into the lungs, where it usually does. And alongside the lungs and surrounding all of these are your blood vessels. And they're in the periphery. And they have all kinds of little red blood cells in them. And these red blood cells are picking up these little oxygen molecules as they go by. And that's important because that's how we transport oxygen to the rest of our tissues, whether it be the brain, or the heart, or our intestines. Probably draw it more like that. Or our skeletal muscle. Or our bones. Joints. This is the joint of the spine. You get the picture. Everywhere in our body requires oxygen to be delivered by red blood cells. But what happens when we perform hyperbaric oxygen therapy? Once again, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which is really oxygen under pressure. We'll draw it underneath it here. So it's oxygen under pressure. Now, this pressure does a lot of things, but one of the things that it does, and they're all really good physiological responses, but what it does is it actually takes this oxygen here from its gaseous form and allows it to dissolve or change into its liquid form. And so oxygen actually gets pushed into the plasma of the blood. So now it's no longer required to be carried by red blood cells. It still does get carried by red blood cells. They still get to it, attach it. So you don't lose that. And that's important to understand. But now your red blood cells, your bloodstream, circulation, which has these red blood cells, as we've talked about through here. Now they have tons of oxygen in the fluid or the plasma all throughout it, really increasing the concentration of oxygen up to 1200% at some deeper pressures. And what happens, which is one of the things that's really cool, is that you create what's called an oxygen concentration gradient, where the concentration is so concentrated inside the microvasculature of the blood vessel that it actually wants to diffuse further into the tissue. Now, usually we only get tissue a certain degree. It can't go very far, so that's why we have to have blood vessels all over our body. But now what we get to do is, because of this oxygen concentration, actually diffuses way further into our tissue. And at 2 atmospheres of pressure, we actually dissolve the oxygen about 400% deeper than it normally would. So that means you're getting a lot more oxygen into these areas of the brain in the heart and the joints, or the bones and the joints, and all these tissues that need oxygen to heal. And not only that, but the pressure actually creates an increased pressure within the bloodstream as well. So that pressure, just in general, we'll call it P here, actually pushes the blood flow further into tissue, and so it's farther into tissue. So we can really actually just utilize all of our vasculature as well, in addition to this scenario here, where we're getting blood flow way deeper into the surrounding tissues, which is really exciting. Now, when we talk about oxygen and why it's important, we have to talk about why it's important, because we know it heals and we know it's important, but oxygen is really important because oxygen is what is required to make energy. Okay? And energy in the body is in the form of ATP. That's called adenosine triphosphate. We have to go through these cycles, the Krebs cycle, the TCA cycle. But basically, there's this thing called the electron transport chain. And that is a chain that has to go through a few processes to make energy at the end. And so what it needs is this oxygen as its final electron acceptor, it's known as, to make energy. So in other words, all things considered, you can have all the components of the pie, you can have everything you need, you can make the perfect pie, but if you don't have an oven, it's not going to bake the pie. So in this case, we can have all the nutrients and all the things we need to make energy, but if we don't have oxygen, that's our oven, we can't bake the pie. So oxygen is required to make energy. That's why if we don't breathe, we die, because we lose oxygen, of course, to our precious tissues. And in all cells, right, every cell in the human body, neurons, cardiac cells, chondroblasts, osteoblasts, all these cells, immune cells, they all need oxygen to make energy. And when they have that, then they can make more components of the cell that are needed to make the cell healthy. So we get regeneration and revitalization of our cells. You say, well, that's great, but what about my organs? Well, cells make up organs. Organs are just a collection of cells that make tissues that end up being organs. So that's just a little biology for you, but that's microbiology. So that's really one of the main ways that hyperbaric oxygen therapy works. And when we look at this picture, it's pretty exciting because we say, well, geez, if I can just do that enough, I should be able to heal most of my cells. And that is true. That is what we see. We see that these cells become very healthy, and the brain, especially, we really love at the lower 1.3 to 1.5 chamber pressures, because that's the best neurocognitive effect, which is the chambers that we use primarily in my office, but because of that effect on the brain. And so when the brain can work better, it does all kinds of different things, and everything really, of course. And it can, now it has all these tissues that it can now utilize better because they're healthier. And so signaling improves, so all the signaling that comes from these organs to the brain, and then the brain is functioning better, so it can process it better, and it can loop back down to control those organs or tissues, whichever, so that it's a really nice cycle of function that is turned back on so that we can be healthier individuals. Now, what happens as well simultaneously, which is really exciting, Let's just erase just a little bit of this here so we can draw a few things. Let's get that there. Okay. That the increase in oxygen is not the only thing that's actually helping these systems heal. And this is really exciting because this is where some of the additional healing comes from with hyperbaric. And it's very, very important for a lot of the conditions that we treat. And so one of the things that it does, in addition to the oxygen under pressure, right, we'll keep that there, is that it also is a really important modulator of inflammation. So it decreases chronic and acute inflammation. And we like to use the word downregulation when we talk about chronic inflammation. But initially, when you have inflammation or damage, let's say to tissue, you get leakage of blood vessels. So you're getting leakage of these internal components, within the bloodstream. And what that creates your inflammation. And that's really important because that creates a lot of pain, creates dysfunction, creates swelling, damages tissue, increases all your inflammatory cytokines and all these different things that are important to regulate, especially, let's say, after a concussion or a head injury that you have. You hit your head, and now we're hitting our head here, and now we create swelling in the brain, and now this brain is being compressed and injured and certainly not getting very good blood flow to itself, and it can create some long-term damage there. So we don't love that, and so we would love to have a mechanism that can reduce that. And hyperbaric does just that for us. And so what hyperbaric does is hyperbaric oxygen creates vasoconstriction. So it actually, if we're going to use the same blood vessel, it actually will take that blood vessel and make it smaller. And so what that does is that prevents or really reduces the leakage of the blood vessels. And now what happens is when you create vasoconstriction, you also reduce oxygen or blood flow. It's really what we're doing. So we say, well, geez, that's not good to reduce oxygen necessarily to our tissues that are injured and actually starving and need that to create energy and heal. Well, that's correct in that. So with hyperbaric, we actually don't lose any of that oxygen because we still have a net positive of oxygen, because these oxygen molecules, which are much tinier, that are in the plasma, can still get into all the tissues, remember, much deeper because of the oxygen concentration gradient, that will allow that tissue to heal, which is really wonderful. And it also reduces chronic inflammation, what we see with like neuroinflammation is a good example. And it downregulates a lot of these genetic marker or genetic components that will create cellular death, inflammation, all of these pieces that we really don't want expressed in our cells and genes, as they would create this chronic state of inflammation that is really detrimental to our health. So we want to decrease inflammation, and we can do that really well with hyperbaric, which is really important. That's one of a major tenet of what we do with hyperbaric. And that's not all. And another thing that it does, which is very exciting, anywhere in the body and in the brain, but especially in the brain for me, because it's a lot of the work that I do, is that it increases your stem cell release. So when you have an increase in stem cell production, then you're able to, stem cells are used not increase stem cell production, but increase in stem cell release. So it increases stem cell release in the brain, our neurological stem cells, and also in the body, you know, that come out of our bones and those types of things. So the brain and the body that are really important for all healing. We really need stem cells for healing, and those are super important part of healing the brain and any tissue in the body to form better function in these tissues and organs. And we also which may be understood here. I'm going to draw increased stem cells. Some of these things. One of the things that's extremely important for people with brain injury and after brain injury is that most individuals get some kind of autonomic nervous system effect. And so this autonomic nervous system is really important for, this is your sympathetics and your parasympathetic system. Actually, let's draw that just a little differently. Because your sympathetics, it's sympathetics are not bad, but we're going to draw them as if we don't like them here, okay? And your parasympathetics. So this one is like the relax and digestion one. This is the one, this is where this is good blood flow to the brain. In our digestive organs. Sorry, my finger isn't the best use of a writing utensil here. And the sympathetic is going to pump blood more to our skeletal muscles, which is really important, right? I always use the example, if a grizzly bear barges into your living room, you really want this sympathetic system to be working. That's your anxiety producing. This is anxiety. This is, in fear. This is, all of those types of systems, worry, that type of thing. But these are the systems that and this is worry happens if you have this chronically. But this is important, right? To have, if a bear comes in, it actually should make you anxious. You should understand that it's dangerous, and you should pump blood, and you should do something and get out of there. The problem is when this system is on all the time, because it's not being regulated well. And who regulates it? This parasympathetic system regulates this. So this parasympathetic system generally inhibits this sympathetic system. And the parasympathetics are different. There's different parts of the brain that I won't get into, but that regulate more sympathetic and more parasympathetic function. And so when concussion occurs, usually with brain injury and those types of things, we usually get an effect to these areas that control parasympathetic. So we usually have a reduction in parasympathetic activity. So now we can inhibit the sympathetics, and they go buck wild. Okay, so when that happens, you become, you may be anxious, you may feel those types of mental, emotional types of activities. But a lot of patients that we see with this, they have, so we're going to draw this, we have a decrease in parasympathetic now because of the injuries. We have an increase in sympathetic. This doesn't happen only with head injury, but I'm using the head injury as an example because it's a very good one, a common one that we use. It happens a lot with migraines too. You see it with migraines and those types of aspects, but it can be anybody. And so a lot of people have brain fog with this. Actually, let's draw that in red so that it's understandable. So a lot of people have brain fog. A lot of people get dizzy and lightheaded. That's different than spinning. Spinning is called vertigo. This is dizziness. And then people will get fatigued much faster. You may see them with their memory, not doing what we want it to do. They're going to be slow processing. But a lot of people tell me they stand up and they get lightheaded. That's not everybody, but you stand up and you get this lightheaded aspect where you're just kind of a little out of it for a second. You stand up too fast. And most of us have experienced that at some point in our life where we just are laying down, it's, and we get up and we've been down for a while and just kind of get a little lightheaded. But these people get it a lot more, get it chronically. And so this is happening all the time. So their brain is really getting a reduction in oxygen. Now, with hyperbaric, we know that we can increase oxygen to the brain and help heal those areas of the brain. Now, the areas that control autonomic are in the brain, but they rely on a lot of these sensory systems in the blood vessels around our heart, in our carotid arteries, aortic sinus, these types of things. So the blood vessels regulate a lot of this. And what hyperbaric does is not only does it heal the brain in these areas that are controlling this, which is extremely exciting for me because this is a lot of my patients and it helps tremendously, but it's also actually exercising and regulating and stimulating the appropriate autonomic activity at the vascular level. So it's actually healing this autonomic nervous system and helping to regulate it at certainly the blood vessel level, and we could extrapolate that it would be healing it at the brain level too. Because we do see this all the time with our patients getting better when we're doing this type of therapy for post-concussion or concussions, and that's really important. And we're very excited about that because that's something that makes a big difference in people's lives. And it certainly makes a big difference too if you're anxious or stressed, or you have that emotional kind of dysregulation too, which comes along with some of these things where you're maybe a little more irritable and all those things. So we really love the improvement in the autonomic nervous system. Now, we also get a really great effect, obviously, in wound healing. I think a lot of people probably have heard about autonomic nervous, hyperbaric oxygen therapy in its ability to heal wounds. So we won't go too deep into that, but it increases all stages of wound healing. Really important for us because these are people that are these are wounds you can see, right? And these are also wounds you can't see, invisible wounds, right? These are the wounds in the brain or the gut or the wherever internally, and so that's really important. So we increase all stages of that, and that is extremely helpful for a lot of people, and we want to really emphasize that. The other thing it does is it increases the expression of good genes, and it decreases the expression of bad genes, which is really exciting because that's known as epigenetics. Because we're always looking to express good genes. We have all these genes that make us up, that we think we have to be like our parents, or we have to be like this. But that's not true, because the expression of those genes is called the phenotype. And that depends on not only your genes, but probably about 50%. Everybody argues this, but 50%. And then there's the environmental influences, what you do, what you learn, how you eat, how healthy you are. If you do hyperbaric oxygen therapy, all these things, this environmental influence is much, much different, and you can really improve function, in the expression of these cells. Turn on your good genes and turn off your bad genes. I think there's like 8,000 genetic markers they've discovered. But there's research on this, which is really exciting. So that's an exciting one. We really want our genes to be expressed well. We certainly don't want to carry forward anybody's bad genes, and we certainly don't want to be just subject to what we have to deal with here. We'd like to have some control over things, right? And that's really what we're talking about. So we're going to increase phenotypical expression, genes, Epigenetics, which is great. And we're also going we know that it increases detoxification, which is really exciting. So it increases detoxification. We think it does it through increasing the lymphatic system. And we also think it does it through increasing CSF flow. There haven't been enough studies on this yet, but we know it does do that. We just, have to infer a few things at this point, which are very much most likely the case. But it, in all, it does improve detoxification, which is really important. That's really helpful, and we use it a lot with treatment. One of the more famous people lately is Chuck Norris's wife, who used it for detox after some gadolinium poisoning from some MRI imaging. But yes, so that is a major one. So we also want to just mention that some very cool studies that have come out that show that at 2 atmospheres of pressure over 60 treatments, that people had increase in telomere lengthening and a decrease in their senescent cells, or cells that are dying off and weak, or bad, zombie cells, they call them. So we had a decrease in those, so they improved in their health, and we also had an increase in telomere length, which is really exciting because shortening of these telomeres is associated with aging. So now we're starting to call hyperbaric anti-aging. It's a little early to say that, but we're starting to see this lengthening of the telomeres, which is the opposite of what we see with aging when they shorten. So we're going to call that anti-aging. So it increases anti-aging. And I'm running out of room here, but forgive me. Great. So we see all this, and we've got all these components. Clinically, we see this happen for people. It's amazing. People get tremendous results. And it's very simple. You're just getting inside of a chamber with pressure and concentrated oxygen or pure oxygen or whatever it might be. And this is happening. It's our body's normal physiology that's geared to react to these things, which is extremely wonderful. Just like gravity helps us to maintain skeletal muscle tone and activation of our receptors in our joints and brain, joints and muscles to activate our brain. With gravity, activating joints to help keep our brain healthy. We see that pressure changes impact the entire physiology of the human body. Oh, terrible artist. Which is really neat. And so that's really what we're looking at. And in the brain, what is exciting that we extrapolate from this is it helps us to create more neuroplasticity. Now, we haven't necessarily measured that. We have seen some studies coming out lately that see that in the brain, they're seeing increases in blood flow and activation with different types of functional MRI and other types of imaging that show that the brain is getting more oxygen and metabolic activity in these areas, which essentially signifies healing. That's what we can infer from that. So the brain is healing, especially in these limbic areas we see, but in all areas of the brain, which is really exciting. And so many of our patients notice decreases in anxiety and depression. PTSD has helped with it. There are studies that have shown that. We see it in our office with panic attacks and I might as well not even write that one. No, that's not even.